Hello, everybody. Welcome to the RotoPros Pre-Lock Show for Tuesday, April 3rd. On this episode of the Pre-Lock Show, we will cover Tuesday's main slate, and I'm joined with Matt. What's going on, Matt?
What's up? Just trying to figure out what to do with these expensive pitchers. I guess that's what we got to start with, right? Kershaw or Verlander?
I think I will side with Kershaw just because the Dodgers were a very bad team against left-handed hitters last season. They ranked in the bottom fifth in just about every major hitting statistic. And without JD Martinez, they get a little bit worse. I guess the real decision lies within whether the roof is open or not to really, make my decision solid. But there's no doubt in my mind that I think the Orioles lineup is way more deadly than the Diamondbacks, even with the way they're currently swinging the bats. But yeah, at the moment, I'd rather play Kershaw or pay up for Kershaw. How about you?
Well, what's the deal with the roof thing again? When the roof is closed, the ball doesn't carry as much, right? Is that what we've established?
Yeah, because the humidity outside stays outside.
Right. So if the roof's open, it's better for hitters. I guess if the roof's open, then we have to just downgrade Kershaw, but kind of hard to figure out how much. In terms of matchup, I think it's close. Yeah, I mean, without JD Martinez, the Diamondbacks are not going to be very good against lefties. They've had some good games so far this season, but it's just not a very good offense overall. They have a couple good hitters. Pollock and Goldschmidt are really good. David Peralta is left-handed, but he's good, and that's kind of it. I mean, Jake Lamb should crush righties for most of the year, but against lefties, he's awful. So it's not a scary matchup, but the Orioles aren't very good offensively either, and Verlander's at home. Verlander's also cheaper, and I guess I'd say Kershaw is just a better overall pitcher by a probably very large amount. His velocity was down on opening day, but I'm not too concerned there. I mean, Kershaw getting marginally worse is still a lot better than Verlander. So it's Kershaw for me. If the roof's open, maybe it narrows the gap a little. So I'm thinking something like 60-40 ratio of Kershaw to Verlander, and maybe it's 55-45 if the roof is open. But I think I'll slightly favor Kershaw regardless.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you. Just purely quality of the pitcher. It's Justin Verlander was never a pitcher that was priced this high until he got traded to the Astros. So I don't really ever feel comfortable paying that much for Justin Verlander. But then again, I feel comfortable paying that for Charlie Morton.
Yeah, the pitchers have been expensive on the high end, but Kershaw is probably underpriced. He's at, is it 12,200? I'm just pulling up the pricing and everything now. Yeah, 12,000. That's lower than what he generally was last year. I mean, we were using Kershaw in the 13,000s all the time, so it's less than he generally costs, and he's really good, and it's a decent matchup, and maybe the park is neutral, but Kershaw should be fine. So both of those guys are definitely in play. I think we'll get into lineup construction, but it's not too hard to fit them both. There are some cheaper offenses we like. So you can't stack the Astros with Kershaw and Verlander together. But before we get into how we can stack around them, I guess let's figure out where we stand now on the rest of the pitching options. So Garrett Richards is going to be – I think he could be my highest owned pitcher because I don't really like anyone else outside of Kershaw and Verlander. I don't know. It's hard to say. Like, you're pitching on DraftKings 2 pitching spots, so it adds up to 200%. If Kershaw and Verlander are getting 120%, 60 or so each, or maybe 70-50, then I think Richards could be in most of the rest of my lineups, and then J Happ is the other guy I would mix in. I don't really think I feel that strongly about Zach Godley. So I don't know. Who do you think your highest owned pitcher will be?
My highest owned pitcher will definitely be Garrett Richards. 6.5 is compared to the people he's priced around, like Miguel Gonzalez and Jack Flaherty, AJ Cole, he's priced under. I'm just having trouble understanding the pricing algorithm from DraftKings on this one. Garrett Richards, he didn't have the best first outing, but it was kind of a product of a couple unlucky, infield singles, which led to, him getting into jams and whatnot. But the one thing about Richards is his velocity was up on all 4 of his pitches in his first start. I believe topped out at like 97 for his fastball. His slider topped out at 90.8, which was a 1.4 mile per hour increase from last season, and his curve was 83 miles per hour. Granted, this is only a 1-game sample size, but it does prove, I guess, that Richards is finally healthy, and if he stays healthy, he will be a pitcher that should reach, the $8,000 to $9,000 range.
Well, status quo is definitely good enough for Garrett Richards. Like his only concern is his health. So if he's either not pitching or he's on a pitch limit or he's just pitching worse because he's dealing with an injury, those are the concerns. I mean, if we're just getting baseline Garrett Richards at 6,500, that's a really, really strong value, almost no matter what the matchup is. And I think it's probably just a slightly negative matchup. So the Indians are an above average offense. They don't have Michael Brantley, and Garrett Richards is at home. And then the win bonus is a little more likely than it would normally be against the Indians because Josh Tomlin, while he's an okay pitcher, he's the worst guy in the Indians rotation, him or Mike Clevenger. But it's not like Richards has to go opposite Carrasco or Kluber, and then there's not as high of a chance that the Angels win. The Angels are actually minus 135 favorites for the game. So there's a pretty good chance that Richards gets the win. And then I guess that's worth mentioning, too, on Kershaw versus Verlander. Verlander is the most likely pitcher on the slate to get a win. So maybe that skews it a little bit for me, but I don't know. I still sort of feel the same way where Kershaw's marginally better. Just on Richards, though, the exposure breakdown, I think now that we know Carlos Correa will be in the lineup, I'll end up with more Richards because since Correa is playing, the Astros are a much more viable stack. It's just better expected output for everybody. And because of that, it's an expensive stack where you can't use as many expensive pitching options. So if Correa was out, I would have gone with more of Verlander and Kershaw and then more of the cheaper offenses. And now with Correa in, I think I'll go with more of Richards and then more Astros stacks too. It's really hard to figure out at this point, like how much of each to use. And I guess it kind of depends on the tournaments you're in. It kind of depends on how many lineups you're going to make. But I think my goal is to get Kershaw and Richards right around the same amount and both marginally ahead of Verlander. So that would be something like 70% Verlander. I mean, 70% Kershaw, 70% Richards, and 50% Verlander. And then that would leave 10% for J-Happ. I think that's sort of my goal, but I know I'm using a lineup builder to make lineups, so who knows what it spits out. But I think that those targeted exposure percentages make sense to me. Is that sort of where you're headed, or you think you're going to be a little heavier on Richards and a little lighter on Verlander?
Yeah, I would be around you, but I don't feel as inclined to use pitchers like J-Happ and Godley, I guess, but we didn't really mention Godley in general. I think the White Sox are a pretty good team against left-handed hitters, and the addition of Castillo makes them, opinion. So I don't really feel strongly about targeting. And the lights just went out here. Sorry.
All right, I'll respond. The White Sox are in terms of their ceiling production, but they also strike out a ton. So let's last year's numbers for the White Sox. Well, they added Wellington Castillo, but they also lost Todd Frazier. They traded him at the deadline. So that probably is a net negative. Frazier was one of their better hitters against lefties, and Castillo is good against lefties too, but probably not as good as Frazier. So hold on, these are loading. You got your lighting fixed. We're good to go there.
Yeah, the lighting's back here. So, anyways, finishing my train of thought, I'm probably at first glance, I think I want to use, maybe Kershaw in 90% of my lineups, and then 75% Richards, and then leave the 25% for Kershaw Verlander lineups with cheap stacks.
So just I guess the argument in favor of Hap, the White Sox, well, they actually were only in the middle of the pack in strikeout rate against lefties. Most of their strikeouts were against righties, and they had a 106 WRC plus against left-handed pitching last year, which ranks, let's see, where did it go? That is fifth highest. The part of the reason that I'm a little more inclined to use Hap in a neutral matchup is that he correlates with Blue Jays stacks. So I maybe won't use very much of Hap in general, but the correlation for the win bonus with the Blue Jays players, I think, makes sense to target. And the Blue Jays are minus 180 favorites for this game. It actually looks like the line opened a little low, and we can talk about Miguel Gonzalez. I think that's the main reason for it in a minute. But the Blue Jays open at minus 165 and are up to minus 180. Hap should do well, but yeah, he's very far behind the top three guys that we've mentioned. And I think for you, I mean, it makes sense to not have him at all. So before we move on to offense, I guess I'll mention Zach Godley briefly. There's negative correlation between Kershaw and Godley because there's only one win bonus between the two of them. So I think it would make sense that if you're using Godley, use him with Verlander and don't use him with Kershaw. But I don't think I'm going to end up using Godley anyway because it's a pretty bad matchup for him against the Dodgers.
Yeah, I would have to agree with you. I don't think I'm going to go down the Godley route. But I could understand why, I guess, someone would want to be a Godley. His numbers last season were very good. He's an extremely ground ball inducing pitcher and struck out both sides of the plate over 20%. So, yeah, but is there any last things you want to say about any of these other pitchers that we didn't really touch base on?
Well, I'll mention the line movement for the ones that we like. There isn't really any sharp money in the Dodgers game. It's just Kershaw's good, and everyone knows Kershaw's good. Same for Verlander. There was some line movement in the Orioles' favor, but I think that was just because Carlos Correa was maybe not going to be playing. So it was a downgrade to the Astros offense, and now that line has come back up. So nothing to see there. The Indians' implied run total has dropped a lot since the line opened. The Angels were minus 120, and the total was 8.5. Now the Angels are minus 135, so they're a little bit higher, but the total has gone from 8.5 down to 8, and the public is betting the Indians in the over. So that's reverse line movement on both fronts, and it's a huge signal in favor of Garrett Richards. I think it's kind of just what we knew already. The Indians are a little overvalued right now. Richards is a little undervalued, and it's good to see the line movement supporting what we already thought, but I don't know. If that were moving in the opposite direction, I'd be concerned. But it makes sense that it is moving in the way that we thought it would, and it's just a little more reason to have confidence in Garrett Richards. So that's basically it for line movement as far as pitching options. There is another notable one that favors a pitcher. The Rockies are really overvalued, I think, against Tyson Ross, where the line moved from 8.5 down to 8. That's the over/under, and the Rockies opened as favorites, and now the line is pick 'em. But I wouldn't roster Tyson Ross. He's so unreliable, and he's not even that much cheaper than Garrett Richards is. So it's really hard to trust someone like that. I mean, he was so bad last year. His velocity was way down, and his control was all over the place. So I think Ross should be able to maneuver through the game. He's going to walk some guys. He'll probably get some double plays because he's a really good ground ball pitcher. He probably won't strike many guys out, and I think Richards has more strikeout potential. So the reason for the downgrade to the Rockies' implied run total is just because the Rockies are really overrated offensively. I don't think it's an indication that you should use Tyson Ross tonight. I think it's just don't really use the Rockies hitters. I mean, I would maybe mix them in because Ross is very blowout prone potentially, depending on how healthy he is, but I don't think I'm using any of Tyson Ross, even though the line movement really supports him.
Yeah, I would agree with everything you said on that front. I'm never really a Tyson Ross homer. How are you?
All right.
Yeah.
But anyway, continuing on, let's move to hitters. As these lineups trickle in, we don't have lineups for the 4 late games that start after 9:40. So.
Well, let's actually, before we get into lineups, we had a question about how to get the best correlation out of your offensive stacks. I just want to touch on that briefly. I don't think there's any real science to it. I don't think there's an absolute method where you need to have the first 5 hitters in a batting order. And I don't think there's any real science to it either, where it's the the first and third hitters correlate more than the first and second hitters. I mean, I guess the way you perceive it playing out in a game is like the leadoff hitter hits a double, the number 2 hitter advances him to third, and the number 3 hitter drives him in. So if that situation plays out enough, the 1 and 3 hitters have more correlation. But I think if studied statistically, I'm pretty sure it has. I just don't remember what the numbers said on it. I think there's enough. It's just players batting near each other creates more opportunities for them to produce the same results and to have correlated results. So if players are on base, the players behind them get RBIs. It's that simple. And the lineups have enough correlation built in just as a whole where when you have a lead, you're seeing the worst part of the bullpen from the other team. All of those effects are so much more pronounced than any like quirky thing where like 2 and 4 hitters are more correlated than like 1 and 2 hitters or something like that. I do think though for mini stacks, I try to avoid using, let's say I have 2 hitters from the same team. I'm going to sort of go out of my way to not pair like a number 1 and a number 6 hitter in the lineup together as the only 2 hitters I'd use from the same team, because they're not really going to share the same run scoring situations. But if both hitters are good value, I wouldn't avoid doing it. It's better to have 2 guys that bat near each other. And I think that's the bottom line. It's not really that relevant what the specific number in the order is. Just you want 2 guys batting towards the top of the order. You want them to bat near each other, and you want as many players from the same team as you can. And that's basically it as far as stacking correlation.
All right. Now is the time to talk about the lineups.
Yeah, let's get the specific players now. Let's do it.
So the Astros, I guess, once again, are our favorite team to target. Mike Wright is a complete junkyard of a pitcher. Hold on. Do you have his stats in front of you?
Yeah, I'm sorry. Your audio cuts out when I load pages, so I should do that as little as possible. But I have them up now. So Mike Wright actually, he only pitched out of the bullpen last year, and he was good out of the bullpen. But his stats as a starter in his career are awful. I would assume that he's just bad. I mean, it's easier to pitch out of the bullpen. The sample size of his relief appearances was only 25 innings last year. He did have a 10 Ks per 9 rate and a 2.5 walks per 9. He did give up homers, though, 20.8% home run fly balls. His ERA was 5.76, and he's underperformed his peripherals basically every year of his career, so he could just be very homer prone. Just looking for velocity jump, if maybe that was why he performed better out of the bullpen. I mean, usually relievers do throw harder because you only have to go one inning at a time, and you don't have to worry about conserving your energy. But Wright actually threw slower last year than he threw in 2016 and 2015 when he was mostly a starter. So that's not a reason for optimism. I think we're looking at just a mediocre, probably below average, maybe even terrible starting pitcher that had some moderate success in terms of his peripherals out of the bullpen. And it was a very small sample, and we shouldn't read too much into it. So I don't think Wright is very good. I think he's not Chris Tillman level. He's not Derek Holland level. But I think he's sort of close to that. And Baltimore has a really bad bullpen behind him, especially without the depth of having Zach Britton there. And if the Astros are winning, which they should be because Justin Verlander's pitching and the Astros have a really good offense, then Baltimore is going to be using a lot of their mop-up duty relievers. So it's a lot of upside for Houston. It's a lot of floor for Houston. They should score at least a few runs. Correa's back. It's a very strong situation, and their prices are fairly reasonable. The issue is just that you can't fit them in with both Verlander and Kershaw. So I'm thinking something like 50% Astros stacks, but I would want, kind of like yesterday, at least one Astros hitter in every lineup, and I would want as much exposure to them overall as you can possibly get.
Yeah, I would definitely have to agree with you that Josh Reddick, once again, a great value play, 3.3K, hitting 5th in this lineup. Right, a right-handed pitcher, struggles a little bit more against left-handers. Anyway, moving on outside of Houston, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong. Oh, God, those lights keep going now.
There's a couple more guys I'll mention on Houston. Marwin Gonzalez is only 3.6K. And then Derek Fisher's batting 9th, and he could kind of get lost because people don't usually roster bottom of the order guys. But the Astros have so much implied output that everyone in the order should bat at least 4 times. And Derek Fisher should get his fair share of at-bats. He's only 3,000, and he obviously correlates with the top of the order guys because he bats right in front of them. Fisher's a good prospect. Like he's one of my favorite targets on the slate too. And I think him batting ninth in a game where there should be a lot of runs scored by the Astros, it actually is more expected at bats than someone at the top of the order for another team, because the Astros should go through their batting order more times than any other team tonight, mostly any other team tonight. So if the Astros have 40 plate appearances, that's 4 for Fisher. And if another team has 40 plate appearances, they're 5-hitter. Or if another team only has 36 plate appearances, let's say, everyone on their team gets 4. So Fisher should bat as much as anyone tonight. I mean, aside from the other guys in the Houston lineup that are in front of him. So I don't care at all that he's batting ninth. I actually think it's a really good spot for him, and he's the cheapest guy in the lineup. So I'll be using him as a cheap plug in other stacks also.
Touch on how you, like, when you say you're targeting, you say 50% Astro stacks. How many of those stacks will you use just straight the 1 through 5?
It's a little quirky tonight because if the 1 through 5 fit with our preferred pitching options, like let's say both of the pitchers that we liked or our top 2 pitchers were 7,000 or 8,000, and you could fit Astros 1 to 5 easily, then I would say most of them would just be 1 to 5. But because we like expensive pitchers tonight, even if you want to go Kershaw with Richards, it doesn't leave a ton of salary to use 1 through 5. Like, it's still fairly expensive. And especially if you want to go with Kershaw and Verlander. Like, I think you can do Kershaw, Verlander, and then back-end Astros. They have some cheaper guys in the second half of their lineup, and there's plenty of expected output for them. You could just go 5 through 9, or you could use one guy at the top of the order and then fill out the rest. So I think I'm going to be all over the place with Houston. I don't think that I'll even – I'd still say 1 through 5 is my most common combination, but I think more so than usual, I'm just going to mix around as many 5-man combos of the Astros as I can. I don't really care where they are in the batting order tonight.
So it's just whatever fits with what you want.
Yeah, it basically, I think as a general rule of thumb, when you're using an expensive offense, if your pitching's cheap, you can do a lot of 1 through 5. But if your pitching's expensive, then it's more reasonable to just mix around and just whatever fits, just go with that.
Have you tried to put these 5K guys in there?
I haven't yet. Let's see what it adds up to. Well, I can just do some quick math in my head right here. So if we have 13.8 or 23.8 for Kershaw and Verlander, and we have 26.2 for the rest of the team, and 5 through 9 gets you, you can just watch me calculate things in my head. 10.9, 14.6, 17.6. It's still going to be tough to fit the back end of the Astros lineup, but it barely fits. So I don't think you can do Altuve or Springer or Correa in a lineup that also has Kershaw and Verlander, unless it's a stack of a different team that's way cheaper. So I guess we can move on to the cheaper teams, but the 1 through 5 stack in a Kershaw-Richards lineup, that fits a little easier. You're going to need cheap plugs. You're going to have like 8,000 for 3 spots or so. So you're going to need a couple guys that are under 3K, but it's doable. It's not that easy.
Yeah, it's easy with the cheap catchers. Miguel Montero is like 3-1, and he's a lefty against a really crappy right-handed pitcher. I kind of like him.
So I guess let's go on to what offenses we like overall. Again, just seeing what the lineups are before we get into more specific plugs. But basically, it's hard to fit Astros 1 through 5 in with Kershaw and with Richards even. So I think most of my 1 through 5s will be Verlander Richards lineups. And then with Kershaw and Richards, you can get a couple with some very cheap punt plays, but a lot of those will even have some of the back-end Astros guys because it's kind of hard from a lineup construction standpoint. But just scanning the other lineups let's talk about the ones we like and what's changed for them. The Blue Jays have Kendrys Morales starting over Devin Travis, and that kind of is annoying for building lineups because those guys are both first basemen. Smoke is a better hitter. He's also batting higher in the order. He's also better from the left side of the plate, which he gets to do tonight. I think Morales is better from the right side of the plate, or Morales has some weird splits where he only hits for power on one side and he hits for a much better average on the other side. I think he hits for better power from the left side too, but he's a better contact hitter from the right. Either way, how would you go about splitting up Smoke and Morales? Like, would you just use mostly Smoke because he's right in the middle of all the other guys you're using, or would you just try to split them?
I think I would go with Smoke unless he doesn't fit because just of the price differential, $700. Usually that's how I, construct my lineups is like if I can't get the guy in there, then I'll just drop down where there's another viable play at that position.
So I have Morales' splits in front of me now. They're more extreme than I thought. He had a 165 WRC plus against lefties last year and only 77 against righties. And this is a righty pitcher tonight. So Morales is actually, last year was a bad hitter against right-handed pitching. That definitely has me more on Smoke's side. And then for his career, Morales has just neutral platoon splits for his career. So I don't know what happened last year. Maybe just a small sample. But it does seem like he has more power when he bats left-handed. I think that's the general trend for him is he can get on base more when he's batting right-handed and he hits for more power when he's batting left-handed. But last year was weird. He couldn't hit righties. So I'm not going to not use him. But, yeah, I think we'll both have Smoke maybe 3 or 4 times as much as Morales. I wish only one of them was playing. It would just make things easier. The rest of the Blue Jays lineup, though, looks fine. Granderson batting leadoff, really good value play at 3,000. Solarte batting 4th at 2.9, really good value play. Grichuk's a good value at 3.2. Donaldson 4.2. I don't know how much of him I'd use as a plug-in, but for stacks, he's certainly fine. So a lot of value on the Blue Jays for pricing.
Yeah, and then outside of Toronto, is there we'll have a starting lineup, but we can, I guess, infer.
Having some technical issues. I think it's okay now. So other starting lineups where we can kind of go through them. We actually have a lot of teams have not released their lineups yet.
Yeah, all the late teams their lineups.
So the teams that have released their lineups are the Astros-Orioles game, the Brewers. It's basically everything after the Astros-Orioles game. There's no lineups. I still like the A's a lot. We'll see what that lineup looks like. Jake Smolinski definitely still in play as a plug, as a punt play. I think he's someone who, if he's batting second or even just in the top 5 in the order, hopefully he's playing at all. But I think he will be in the first 5 guys, and he probably will bat second. He's someone to definitely plug in for Astro stacks to make them fit better. And I guess I'm fine speculating on him because I'm assuming he'll play. He batted second last time they faced a lefty. Other lineups for plugs, though, it doesn't really look great for the early games. I mean, the Braves are stackable. Preston Tucker at 2.6 is probably a good plug. Is there anyone else that jumps out to you? I think from the early games, Tucker is really, and the Blue Jays guys are really the only ones.
Yeah, Tucker. Yeah, I think Bryce Harper is definitely going to be the most expensive player on the slate. I think BVP is a very popular stat across the community for whatever reason. And
most popular player on the slate? Yeah, I think so too.
His BVP versus Teheran is like insane, pretty insane. I think it's 17 for 34, 7 home runs, crazy slash line, whatever.
That definitely coincides with Teheran just getting worse. Like, basically, Teheran was good for some of his career, and then Harper's only been in the league a few years, and Teheran started getting bad right around when Harper started playing. So Harper has only seen the bad Julio Teheran. I guess, I don't know. I would use Harper. It's a good matchup. Teheran's just not good. I am wary of ownership there, though. I would try to be underweight to the field on Harper. If we're talking about expensive plugs, I'd rather just use the Houston guys. I mean, Springer isn't as good of a hitter as Harper, but he has a much easier matchup. Harper's a strong bet to score a ton of points tonight. It's just, if everyone's using him, it's not really the best move game theory-wise. Although I don't know how much more chalky he's going to be than the Houston guys are. Like, do you think he'll be that much more highly owned than the Astros players?
Yeah, I do. I think coming off his monster performance last night and these BVP numbers, and they're usually touted across Twitter and other websites are very high on BVP. So, and just the name he carries, it's like Trout, Stanton, those guys. They usually carry at least 20% ownership regardless of the matchup.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I could see the Astros, though, being all 20% owned in that range, maybe even 30 for a couple of them. But Harper could be above 30. Like that wouldn't shock me at all. I just think it'll be kind of close there. I don't see Harper being in the 40s or anything, but who knows? And I guess it depends what contest you're talking about. I don't have any interest in any of the rest of the Nationals outside of Miguel Montero as a punt, because 2.1K on DraftKings is just like no one's ever that cheap. Yeah. I mean, you don't really have to do much as a starting player to be worth 2.1. So I'd use Montero to plug in, but the rest of the Nationals are really expensive. And even in a good matchup, I just prefer other teams. I think they could score a lot of runs, but that's just way too pricey for them. I think Harper makes sense, and I think Montero makes sense, and that's really it.
Yeah, you can use like the 1 through 5, the Astros, like we said, or 1 through 6 minus Bregman with Montero, Smolinski, and still a nice chunk of salary to use on your last position.
Yeah, the reason I wouldn't use Harper much is just because the Astros are pricey. It's not because I don't like Harper tonight. It's just I like the Astros more, and you can't fit Harper with them most likely. I mean, if you go like Verlander, Richards, the back end of the Astros lineup, then you get expensive plugs. Or if Harper's plugged into like a Blue Jays or A's or Braves stack, maybe that works. But I think I'd rather use Springer as a plug, so I won't have much price Harper. And it's a good matchup for Mike Trout, too. He's going to be way lower owned than Harper. Josh Tomlin is fly ball prone. He gives up home runs. He's pretty good, but he does give up homers. And Trout is as good of a hitter as anyone. So I think Trout makes for a good pivot off Harper. If we're talking about expensive punt plays, or not punt, if we're talking about expensive plugins, I think Trout could be a better value than Harper just for ownership reasons. Like maybe Trout's 10% owned and Harper's 35, and the expected output for the two of them is not really that different.
Yeah, I definitely agree. The Angels right-handers were the last team I was going to cover because Tomlin is a very fly ball prone pitcher and he has reverse splits. Mm-hmm. And the top of the Angels order has a ton of power with Cozart, Trout, and Upton. Even Pujols is not the worst one-off plug at 3.4K on DraftKings.
Yeah, I don't think Cozart is quite good enough to warrant the 4.4K price tag in a probably neutral matchup, but I do like Trout and Upton a lot, especially Upton. That's just it's a cheaper price than Upton usually is. Maybe the pricing there is just because it's the Indians and they weren't really looking at who the starter is. Tomlin's nowhere near as good as the high-end guys for Cleveland. So Upton batting third, assuming he's in there because we don't have a lineup yet. I think he's a strong plug-in. Just I don't know. I feel like it's going to be a lot. It's kind of like a stars and scrubs slate, though, because we're either going to have very cheap stacks with very expensive plugs or vice versa. And that doesn't really leave much room to put like a 4.2 mid-range guy in there. But I think Upton just for his price makes sense. If he fits, then I'm happy to use him. I'm not sure if there's much else to cover because we don't have all these lineups. I guess we talked about Smolinski. I don't know. Is there anything else you want to mention?
Yeah, Smolinski was the guy, and then Stephen Piscotty is another guy in that A's lineup, right-hander, projected hit, 6, move up to 5th if Matt Olson drops down. He's only 3K on DraftKings. He's a strong value play, I think, if he hits the top of the order. And then, yeah, nothing really entices me in this Padres-Rockies game, kind of a fade.
Yeah, Kyle Freeland's not good. And the Padres do have some cheap righties. So for punt plays, I think they make sense also. Like Hunter Renfroe has a lot of power. He was good against lefties last year. He's potentially going to be a really good power hitter for a long time, and he's only 3K. So if you're picking a Padres guy, I think it's Renfroe or maybe Margot, but they're all kind of interchangeable. They're all right around 3K. They have upside for different reasons, but I don't think that they're terrible plays. Like I don't know. If you have a lot of lineups, maybe mix in a few Padres. And then before we sign off, I'll mention one more team. The Rangers are actually a lot cheaper than I remember from looking at it yesterday. And the wind is blowing out in that game. That's part of the reason the over-under is moved up. It's part of the reason we like Oakland. But there's reason to like Texas too. Joey Gallo's 3.8, and he's facing Kendall Graveman. One thing, I mean, I don't usually care about BVP splits because they usually are very small samples and they're just not very reliable and not very predictive. But what is important sort of is batter type versus pitcher type. And I guess it sort of makes intuitive sense that when you have a fly ball pitcher versus a ground ball hitter, or a ground ball pitcher versus a fly ball hitter, the difference in their styles, like the difference in the plane of the ball and the plane of the swing, will create a lot more hard contact. So Graveman is a very extreme ground ball pitcher, and Joey Gallo is as much of a fly ball hitter as there is. I mean, he basically only hits home runs and strikes out. So Gallo has a really favorable matchup. He's a lefty against a righty. He has that pitcher type advantage, whatever weight you want to put on that. But even if you aren't considering that, Gallo is going to be batting in the top of the order, 3.8, bad pitcher. He's a power hitter. Wind is blowing out. I mean, Gallo, I know we mentioned Upton at 4.2 and some other guys in the low 3,000s. I think if you have the salary to use a plug-in that costs in the high threes, Gallo is by far the best option. And then other Rangers make sense too. Chu is 3.1, could be batting leadoff again. Beltre and Mazzara are below 3.5. The more I look at it, Texas seems like a strong stack. I think the other ones we like are better, but for plugins, I think Texas is a really good source of value.
Yeah, and then that correlates with Cole Hamels, and we all know you want to roster Cole Hamels tonight.
Yeah, I'm going to roster Texas stacks with Cole Hamels. No, but there always is a little bit of extra correlation if you roster two sides of the same game. I mean, maybe it goes to extra innings. So if you want to put some Rangers in your A's stacks, I think that makes sense because there's potentially a bonus if the game goes to extra innings. I mean, we saw the Dodgers and Diamondbacks go to 15 innings last night. It was a lot of extra at-bats for everybody, and maybe runs aren't scored in those extra innings, but you get some hits, you get stolen bases. It's just a small amount of correlation. It's not like overtime in basketball, but it matters a little. So I think that makes sense. Either way, though, I like Gallo as a plug.
Yeah, I actually, looking at the prices, you can easily use those batters with Verlander and Kershaw, and could create some upside if that game, it's a lot of runs.
Yeah, so I guess let's rank our favorite stacks because we did map out the pitching exposure. I'll go Astros and Blue Jays are my top two. I'm going to lean towards the Astros now that Correa's in and now that Smoke and Morales are both playing, because that downgrades the Blue Jays a little bit from the lineup building perspective. So Astros, then Blue Jays, then A's, and then I think 4 and 5 would be Atlanta and Oakland. Is there any difference for you? Atlanta and Texas, 4 and 5.
Yeah, I may. Yeah, it's basically the same. I may have the A's slightly above the Blue Jays.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think all those are good choices. So
I don't
really have much reason to disagree with you there.
Yeah, we're all on the same page, anyways. Yep, but that about wraps it up for today. Thanks for tuning in, and head to RotoPros.com if you're looking for extra information and insight for us. We have a around-the-clock Slack network where you can ask questions, get answers to help you win in daily fantasy sports. Thanks, and we will see you guys tomorrow.
Yep, thanks for watching.